Greetings and welcome. My name is Jack and this is a beginner's guide for the Pathfinder 2nd edition Sorcerer, where we try to learn a new class by theory crafting a character build from level 1 to level 20. As usual, we are going to start with a brief class overview, then I'm going to lay down the general character concept, then I'm going to show the build from level 1 to level 20, and we are going to conclude with a spell snapshot at some levels to see how the spell selection looks like as our character progresses. So we're going to take a look at level 1, level 6, level 11, level 16, and finally level 20. If you would like to learn more about the Sorcerer class, check out Gortle's Sorcerer Guide, RPG Bot's Guide to the Sorcerer, as well as Gortle's Spell Guide to get a comprehensive evaluation of the spells in the different schools. With that being said, let's get right into the class overview. The Sorcerer is usually one of the two big arcane spellcasting classes, the other being the Wizard. While the Wizard derives their power from study, research, and tomes of arcane lore, the Sorcerer instead has an innate understanding of magic. His powers derive from his blood. He is maybe the descendant of a powerful magical creature or spellcaster. He was influenced by divine forces, or maybe he was the object of some kind of experimentation, or any other explanation that can justify why this character is suddenly able to cast spells. When talking about the Sorcerer, it is almost impossible not to make a comparison with the Wizard, because historically they have been the two arcane primary spellcasters in Dungeons & Dragons, where the Wizard is like the nerdy guy, the Sorcerer is the more charismatic, cool kid in town. However, in this comparison, the Sorcerer has not always come up on top. For example, in previous edition, the Sorcerer suffered from a delayed spell progression, and specialist wizards were usually more versatile as prepared spellcasters when compared to the limited spell selection that the Sorcerer as a spontaneous spellcaster gets. In 5th edition, the general consensus is also that the Wizard is the superior spellcaster. While the Sorcerer no longer gets a delayed spell progression, they have access to less spells once again, and their spell list for some reason is more restricted and is lacking some very powerful and iconic spells like summon spells or the Wall of Force spell. While thanks to sorcery points, it's technically true that the Sorcerer potentially has access to more spells per day, the Sorcerer usually wants to use these points for meta magic as well, and potentially to power up some of their subclass features. And also, we must not forget that the Wizard has access to Arcane Recovery to generate more spell slots after a short rest. So, at the end of the day, many times the Wizard is going to end up casting more spells or just as many spells as the Sorcerer. However, it's not all doom and gloom for the Sorcerer. In many video game adaptations, for example, based on the 3.5 or 5th edition systems, the Sorcerer performs very well. This is because the application of spells is generally more limited in a video game than it is in the tabletop. The spells have inherently less versatility because you don't have access to the unlimited creativity and freedom that a player has while playing a tabletop. And so there are fewer spells that are very good to take. And the fact that the Sorcerer can cast more of them, and we are playing with a 3.5 inspired system in games like Neverwinter Nights or Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, then just the fact that you get more spells is sufficient to make the Sorcerer come up on top when compared to the Wizard. The other big advantage the Sorcerer has is that they are a charisma caster, and charisma is in general a more fun stat to invest into. While knowing everything and being an intelligence character can certainly be very satisfactory, being the face of the group is going to usually put you in the spotlight more often and result into more memorable role-playing moments. With all these things in mind, let's see how the Sorcerer looks in Pathfinder 2nd edition. They have the standard class framework of a spellcaster, so your hit points are terrible, your saving throws are terrible, your attacks and attack progressions and defenses are all terrible, you don't have many skills at all, in fact you're bad at skills as well, so the main reason you are here for this class is the spellcasting, and the spellcasting is excellent. There is no delayed spell progression, you get up to legendary proficiency like everyone else. You also get more spell slots than a conventional spontaneous spellcaster. So compared to a bard, for example, you always have one extra spell at every single level. But most importantly, The thing that's really striking about the Sorcerer is that they are no longer tied just to the arcane list. They can choose any list of those available and become a Sorcerer specialized in that list. So in this way, the Sorcerer is kind of like the fighter, not in the sense that it has a consistent mechanical advantage throughout their character development over other spellcasters, but in the sense that they are this white canvas of a character. They are a character that you can really customize and make your own and take into many different and very distant directions. The way you get access to these different subclasses is by selecting at level 1 your bloodline. There are a ton of different bloodlines, and each of them provide you a set of granted spells, which are spells that are automatically learned at every single level. They grant you access to a specific spell list and a number of skills. They also give you access to a focus spell, and then they have a blood magic effect, which is an effect that triggers every time you cast a spell. Every bloodline is also flavored thematically around the origin of your powers. So for example, you have the Aberrant bloodline being this Lovecraftian, unknowable, cosmic source of power. Or if you want to play as the good guy, you can maybe go for an angelic bloodline and have your powers coming from celestial entities. Now, this does not mean that you have to necessarily be good. Just this is the source of your power, and then you can choose what to do with it. So with all this in mind, let's see what I plan to do with the Sorcerer. Now, the first thing to decide with the Sorcerer is what spell list we are going to have access to, and therefore what bloodline we want to be. Now, we could be Occult Sorcerers. Occult is a very fun list, and in that case, we would be competing with the Bard. I feel that that would be a very harsh competition to go up against, because the Bard gets a lot of incredibly powerful class features to support and buff the entirety of the party. And so what the Sorcerer trades for that is a bit of extra spells, a bit of extra spells known, and their bloodline features. And I don't feel like that is necessarily good enough to offset what you would lose by being a bard. So I think that as an occult caster, the argument of being a bard is very compelling. And I fear that an occult sorcerer, especially made by a new player, runs the risk of being just a bad copy of a bard. If we look at the divine list, now we are competing with the cleric. Of course, we are spontaneous, unlike the cleric who is prepared. So we have that potential advantage if we like spontaneous spellcasting more. Clerics do get more high-level spells thanks to Divine Font, but the Sorcerer has access to different feats that allow them to unlock spells from other lists, and the Divine list really needs that. And this is more convenient than relying on your domain spells granted by your deity. We also do not need to worship a deity in particular to be a Divine Sorcerer, and we're not bound by any anathema, so there's also that advantage. We are not as survivable as a cleric. We have worse HP, but we're not that much worse than a cloistered cleric. So I feel that for the divine list, the competition against the cleric is more compelling. However, the divine list itself is the most limited of the four, so I decided not to go for that. With the primal list, we would be competing against the druid. And if we were to make a blaster caster, I think that the sorcerer would come up on top. And this is because the elemental bloodline really provides a lot of cool buffs to the blasting archetype. And also sorcerer has class features which further support blasting. So if we were just to play a pure blaster, the primal spells list is very well suited to supporting this playstyle. And the sorcerer, I think, does more for it than the druid does. However, what the druids gain in terms of utility and fun factor from wild shape, I think offsets the blastiness of the sorcerer. And I'm also not a big fan of blaster casters because I feel that in systems like 5th edition and Pathfinder as well, the true damage dealers are the martial characters. So I would rather specialize my spellcasters into some other thing. And this leaves us with the arcane list. Now, we have not covered a full arcane spellcaster yet, and choosing the arcane list also has the unique advantage of being able to compare with the wizard in the next video very well. So we're going to try and make a competitor for the wizard by making an arcane spellcaster and seeing how well we perform in this role. My bloodline of choice is the Imperial. It has an amazing list of granted spells. Many of these spells would be my first pick for that level. And even the worst ones are still spells that I would want to know. So that's amazing. The bloodline spell is good enough. It makes us better at skills. It can grant us an instant training in a skill. So that's good enough for a sorcerer focused spell, which are not that exceptional in general, especially when compared with like cleric focused spells or focused spells like Wild Shape or Lay on Hands. But it's nice out of combat utility, so I'm not complaining. And our blood magic effect also gives a status bonus to skill checks, which is going to be relevant for this character. So having chosen our bloodline of choice and our spell list, the next thing I want to address with this character is the third action problem. Now, we have 3 actions. If we are marshals, we usually know how to spend them. If we really don't know what to do, we can use our third action for a strike with a -10 penalty, potentially. It's not exceptional, but it's good enough. As a spellcaster, though, our spells usually cost 2 actions, which leaves us with a third action, and we don't want to use it to strike, because our strikes are terrible. And if we are standing in the back lines, as we should, we may not need to stride or raise a shield, so what do we do with our third action as a spellcaster? And with this character, I think the answer is we're going to try and use charisma skills. Since we are a charisma class and intimidation has all these feats which work very well in combat, so much so that like 2/3 of my character have these feats, let's try and make an intimidation focused character and see how much better we are than just your average intimidating character. Finally, the last thing I want to do is I want to use my archetype to shore up some of the weaknesses of the sorcerer. And for this, a very iconic pairing is the champion archetype to get armor proficiency and access to some incredibly powerful reactions and feats that will support my build. So am I going to make a Sorkadin or Soradin? Well, not really. In 5th edition and in general in Dungeons & Dragons, a Sorkadin is a Gish character, so a character which uses weapons and spells together. We are just focusing on the spells side of things. We are not going to use any weapons. We are definitely not a Gish. We are a spellcaster with hopefully better defenses than a spellcaster who is trying their best to give the wizard a run for their money. Let's see if we can accomplish that. Starting at level 1, as usual, we are going to pick an unconventional ancestry. It is not necessary, but the Hobgoblin ancestry provides some nice support to the intimidation. For the background, I'm going to choose Farmhand. Assurance in Athletics might seem useless. There is a reason if I take it, which will become apparent later on. Again, this is not essential, so you can really pick your favorite. And as for the heritage, let's spice it up and be a Tiefling Hobgoblin. This allows us to take Nimble Hooves at level 1 for the extra movement. Now for intimidation builds, Hobgoblins also have the Remorseless Lash. This allows them to prevent enemies that they strike from reducing their frightened condition below 1 until the beginning of the next turn. So since we're not going to be striking, this is useless for us, but it's a feat to keep in mind for martial characters who want to invest in intimidation. For our abilities, the wisdom penalty is a bit worrying, so I'm going to use the alternative ability selection, and we want to invest heavily into charisma because we are sorcerers. And so once we allocate our free boosts, we can start with the 14 in strength, which is necessary if we want to take the champion dedication, 14 in constitution, 18 in charisma, and I'm going to put 12 in dexterity so that we can start slow with medium armors and have a decent armor class, and eventually wear heavy armor. We only get 2 skills, and I'm going to take 2 charisma skills. Since we want to try and be faces, I'm taking diplomacy and intimidation. Finally, as I said, our bloodline is going to be the Imperial bloodline, which gives us access to the arcane spell list. So thanks to our ancestry and heritage, we get dark vision. The first class feat we get at level 2 is going to be Familiar. This is a nice addition for any spellcaster. If you want to know more about familiars, you can check out my Druid video and my Ranger video as well, where I cover familiar abilities and how useful they can be. Right now we can use it to get extra cantrips, or we can use it as scouts if we are not too concerned about losing them we can really tailor the familiar to our needs. For our archetype, as I said, we are going to take the champion dedication. This gives us access to all kind of armor, so we can be wearing medium armor and a shield to increase our survivability. We must also choose a deity and an archetype cause. Since we are tiefling hobgoblins, I think we are going to be an evil champion. And in particular, I'm going to choose the Desecrator cause because eventually it gives us access to a very nice reaction. The tenets of evil say that we must never perform acts that are purely good, and we must also never put another person's needs before our own, but we must always get something in return. And this is your average Dungeons & Dragons player's behavior anyway, most of the times. And also the Desecrator cause tells us that we must always subvert or corrupt everything in our path that is pure and good, which is your average sorcerer behavior. So these tenets are not really that restrictive for us. We get 2 more skill trainings, thanks to the champion. One of them has to be religion, and the other one is free, and we can round up our charisma skills with that. We also get our first skill feat. We can use the intimidate action in combat often, but if we already did that and the enemy has become immune to our further intimidation action, then we can fall back on Bon Mot to apply other debuffs to the enemies, which is pretty nice. At level 3, we get our first skill increase, and at this point, depending on what you're doing more often, if it's diplomacy or intimidation, you can pick one or the other. I'll go with intimidation because I feel like this character is like an evil-ish character, so they're probably going to intimidate more often than they're going to try and be reasonable. For our first general feat, we want to be able to jump into heavy armor as soon as possible, and for that we need the Dwarven Unburdened Iron feat, and so I'm going to take Adopted Ancestry to eventually unlock that. If you really want to get into heavy armor at level 2, you can start as a dwarf, get Unburdened Iron at level 1, and with Assurance in Athletics, right at level 2, you can technically be wearing heavy armor without suffering from movement penalties and being able to fall back to your assurance whenever you have to roll athletics without taking horrible penalties to your roll. However, you're still going to suffer these penalties on acrobatics roll and or other dexterity rolls such as stealth and thievery. It really depends how much you feel you're going to be targeted. It's not compulsory to be wearing heavy armor. You can resort to your standard spellcaster's methods of defending yourself, like casting mage armor and, in general, staying away from combat, which is the most effective strategy. But heavy armor from level 2 is also a possibility if you really want that. At level 3, we also start getting signature spells, which we will see more in details in the spell Snapshot. At level 4, we get an amazing class feat, which is Arcane Evolution. This gives us a mini spellbook, like the one of a wizard, and an additional spell which we can add to our repertoire. So we can either learn an additional spell or get an additional signature spell. With our free archetype, I'm going to take Basic Devotion, and this is going to allow us to start sorting out our reactions. With Divine Grace, we have a reaction which we can attempt against the save against the spell, and this adds a +2 circumstance bonus to the save. It's a pretty nice reaction. We can also get Assurance in Acrobatics in order to shore up the other important skill that would be hampered by wearing heavy armor without high strength score. Arcane Evolution also gives us an additional skill proficiency, and we might as well take Acrobatics. At level 5, we get another skill increase, and here I'm going to get Diplomacy up to Expert. We also get our first ability boosts, and since right now I think we're going to start wearing heavier armors, we can stop investing into Dexterity and instead put our free boosts into Wisdom. And then I'm going to keep raising Strength so that eventually we can just wear heavy armor without having to resort to all the Assurance shenanigans. I'm also going to boost Charisma as well. For the Ancestry feat, again here you can take Unburdened Iron, so you can pop into heavy armor, or if you feel you don't really need it, you can take Agonizing Rebuke. This means that when we successfully demoralize a foe, that foe is taking 1d4 mental damage at the start of every one of their turns, as long as they are frightened and they are still fighting us. This damage increases as our proficiency in Intimidation increases, so our Intimidate action becomes a lot better. We can actually deal extra damage with it. We also get increased proficiency in Fortitude saving throws. At level 6, we can also get another iconic Sorcerer feat, which is a level 1 feat called Dangerous Sorcery. This allows us to add additional damage whenever we cast a leveled spell equal to that spell's level. A nice bit of damage increase on our spells. We can also get more reactions, and this is the reason why we chose Desecrator, because by taking as an archetype feat Champion's Reaction, we unlock the Selfish Shield reaction. This allows us to gain resistance equal to 2 plus half our level against the damage of an attack which hits us from an enemy within 15 feet. This is not necessarily a melee strike, but it can be any type of damage source, including spells. So a nice buff to our survivability. Since we are raising our strength, we can invest into Intimidating Prowess and gain circumstance bonuses to Intimidation. These would stack with our blood magic bonuses to Intimidation, which trigger every time we cast a spell. So we start getting pretty good at intimidating. And every time we succeed, we deal extra damage thanks to our Agonizing Rebuke. Speaking of which, at level 7, we might as well increase our proficiency to Master so we can deal a little bit of extra damage, unlock better intimidation skill feats, and just be overall better at carrying out intimidation actions. For the general feat, I think we can finally take Unburdened Iron, thanks to Ancestral Paragon. We don't have yet the 18 in strength we would require for heavy armor, but thanks to all the feats investment we've taken up to now, we can just jump into it without too many concerns. If you want to invest your first skill feats into other directions, you can just wait until you are level 10 and you've got 18 in strength. But I feel that usually the impact of early skill feats is not that big, and so we can use them for this purpose and not lose too much in character efficiency. At level 7, we also get expert proficiency in our spells, spell attack rolls, and spell DCs. At level 8, here we get another very iconic sorcerer feat, which is Cross-Blooded Evolution. This is basically D&D 5th edition's Bard's magical secrets. We get it 2 levels earlier than Bards, but we can only pick one spell. And this spell can be of any tradition other than the one that matches our bloodline, so we can shore up the holes in our spell list very nicely with this feat. And should we want to, we can retrain this additional spell as we level up to unlock higher level spells outside of our list. So this is an amazing feat, and I think on its own this could very well be the reason why you're playing a sorcerer. Level 8 is an amazing level for us also because we can get Advanced Devotion and unlock a very powerful 4th level champion feat which supports our intimidation archetype very well, and that is Aura of Despair. Enemies within 15 feet have a -1 circumstance penalty to saving throws against fear, but also as long as they remain within 15 feet of us, they cannot reduce their frightened value below 1, which means that, among other things, the damage from our Agonizing Rebuke is going to keep triggering at the end of every turn as long as they stay next to us. This is another reason to increase our survivability, because we kind of want to be in melee, not necessarily adjacent to a foe, but close enough that this aura is triggering. And so we have heavy armor, we have reactions that can decrease the damage we take, and the enemy can try and take us out and suffer from these debilitating effects, or they can try to get away from us, increasing our survivability and wasting actions. So this is a very nice combination. And to round out the amazingness of level 8, we also get Battle Cry for a free demoralize action at the start of combat. Very good. Level 9, the second master skill increase, goes to Diplomacy for our Bon Mor and non-combat related encounters. Hopefully we're going to use Diplomacy more often than Intimidation. And for the Ancestry feat, there is the good old-fashioned Mountain Stoutness for the extra HP. Very important if we are planning to stay relatively close to danger. We also get better proficiency in Reflex Saving Throw. Level 10 is time for another ability boost. We can get 18 in Strength, 18 in Constitution, 14 in Wisdom. Now we meet the Strength requirement for Heavy Armor, but Unburdened Iron is still giving us 5 extra feet of movement, so it's still useful. And we get our Charisma up to 20 for a +5 modifier. For our class feat, we could go for Signature Spell Expansion to get extra signature spells. I don't feel like we need them that urgently. We will take this eventually, but I think I'm just going to take Quicken Casting here. You can use it only once a day, and you can use it only on low-ish level spells, but the ability to cast 2 spells in a combat encounter once per day is bound to come in handy against bosses. For the Archetype feat, we are going to keep trying to increase our survivability by taking Champion Resiliency, which grants us extra HP basically at every level because we are consistently picking champion feats. We can also get more skill feat to support the Intimidation archetype, like Terrified Retreat. At level 11, it's time to choose which skill we're going to bring up to Legendary, and I think this is a face character, despite us being horrible half-demon hobgoblins. So I'm going to take Deception up to Legendary as well, and right now I'm going to increase it to Expert. For the general feat, I usually take this earlier, but better now than never. Incredible Initiative makes it easier for us to act sooner. This is also when we increase our Perception to Expert, so our Initiative just took a big jump at level 11. We also get Simple Weapon Expertise, which is useless and we are never going to use. At level 12, for the class feat, we can take Bloodline Focus. This allows us to recover 2 focus points every time we refocus instead of only 1. But hang on, we only have 1 focus point, which we can use to cast Ancestral Memories. Why would we take this? Well, because for the free archetype, we're going to jump for a short while out of the champion and instead take the Blessed One Dedication. We are blessed by the deity we worship because we are champions. This gives us an extra focus point and access to the Lay on Hands focus spell, which we don't have because we are evil champions, so we cannot unlock this with our champion dedication. This is a nice action we can use to heal ourselves or somebody else, and if we use it for somebody else, we also provide them a status bonus to armor class. This is, in general, a way to use our focus points, both of them, in combat, because I don't think Ancestral Memories is going to be something we do in combat very often. So all of a sudden, we've unlocked focus points in battle with a very potent effect. We also get a skill feat, and we can take Terrifying Resistance. Every time we demoralize a creature, we gain circumstance bonuses to saving throws against that creature's spells. So we can use this +1, which is free, and keep our reaction for Selfish Shield without having to necessarily rely to Divine Grace. Although Divine Grace is still a nice backup because it gives a bigger bonus and because we don't need to demoralize enemies for this to work. At level 13, for the skill increase, we just bring Deception up to Master. For our Ancestry feat, Tiefling is going to come in handy again because it gives us access to Fiendish Wings. You can take this earlier on if you want, instead of Mountain Stoutness, if you want to be able to fly for 10 minutes per day. I felt like the extra survivability was more important since we are in melee a lot, but we can take it now and look pretty cool and also be able to fly. We get better proficiency in armor and armored defense. Since our dexterity is garbage, there is no reason for us to jump out of our heavy armor, so this is useless. And speaking of useless things, we also get extra damage with weapons and unarmed attacks, which is something which we are never going to do. At level 14, there aren't many feats at this level which look really amazing, so I think we can take Signature Spell Expansion here. And to further increase our survivability, we can take Diverse Armor Expert, which increases our proficiency in heavy armor up to Expert. Unfortunately, we do not get the specialization effects of that armor, so our reflex saving throws are very, very bad. We get a skill feat. Since we are faces, but we don't have a particularly high perception, we can take Lie to Me to instead use our deception instead of perception to determine whether people are lying to us or they're being sincere. At level 15, it's time for our first legendary skill increase, and you guessed it, we're going to take Intimidation. It's time for ability boosts, and since our reflex saving throws are garbage, I'm going to stop investing into strength and just pump dexterity a bit to try and address that issue. I'm going to keep investing into constitution and charisma and also increase our wisdom for initiative and will saving throws. You can take whatever general feat you want at level 15, but remember that at level 17, you want to respec out of it in favor of Canny Acumen to buff one of your saving throws. In particular, I will choose Fortitude saving throws. We also get Master Spellcasting Proficiency. At level 16, we do have an amazing class feat, and that feat is Greater Mental Evolution. This adds a spell to our repertoire for each spell level we can cast. So one of the limits of spontaneous spellcasters is their spell known. As arcane sorcerers, we not only get extra spells slots to cast, but we also get extra spells known on top of our bloodline spells. So this is absolutely amazing. For our free archetype feat, I'm going to take another champion feat. You can take Desperate Prayer if you want to use more focus spells. You can take Deity's Domain if you want to unlock offensive focus spells. if you worship a deity that gives you access to the Wormkin domain, you can get very nice offensive focus spells. I'm just going to take Ongoing Selfishness instead. This increases the effectiveness of our Selfish Shield reaction and makes it so the resistance we gain when we use this applies to all damage from that enemy until the end of the turn, instead of just that particular attack. Finally, we can get our first legendary skill feat, and that's of course going to be Scared to Death. At level 17, we get our second legendary skill increase, and I'm going to take Diplomacy. We also get an Ancestry feat, and for that, I'm going to be taking Relentless Wings for permanent flying. So maybe we can flap over the heads of our enemies, making it harder for them to reach us, while still applying the effects of our demoralizing aura, although I would expect most enemies at this level to be able to deal with this very simple strategy. We also get better proficiency in will saving throws, and the ability to critically succeed when we succeed instead. At level 18, we get another amazing sorcerer feat, which is Greater Cross-Blooded Evolution. This is Cross-Blooded Evolution, but greater. We get up to 3 spells from other tradition in our repertoire. These are still additional spells known, and they can be any spell in the game. For our free champion feat, I'm going to take, again, Advanced Devotion, and I'm going to take Desperate Prayer. Once per day, we can get an additional focus point, and so we can do a little bit more healing with Lay on Hands in case of emergencies. For our skill feat, I'm going to take the Legendary Diplomacy skill feat, which is Legendary Negotiation. At level 19, we get our last skill increase, and I'm going to bring Deception up to Legendary. We get the general feat, and it's a bit late, but I'm going to take Toughness for the extra HP. We get our 10th level spell, and we also get Legendary Spellcasting Proficiency. And finally, at level 20, we round up the character with our ability boost. We can bring Dexterity up to 16. Hopefully this is going to address a bit our crappy saving throws. Constitution and Charisma are up to 22, and Wisdom is up to 18. Our capstone feat is the usual feat for spellcasters at this level, the feat that grants you an extra 10th level spell, and in the case of the sorcerer, it's called Bloodline Perfection. Our final archetype feat is kind of a capstone feat, but not for the champion, but for the blessed one. And that feat is a level 20 feat, which is called Rejuvenating Touch. This makes our Lay on Hands absolutely amazing. It makes it so when we target an ally with Lay on Hands, they gain 10 temporary hit points at the start of their turn for the next 10 rounds. Very powerful. It does end if the ally is unconscious, so it doesn't just make you immortal, but it's incredibly powerful. And for our last skill feat, we're going to take the last legendary skill feat for Deception, which is Revealed Machinations. And with this, we have finished building our sorcerer. It is apparent up to now that we are pretty good at intimidating, with a plus 34 that can benefit from our +1 circumstance bonus thanks to our high strength, and a +1 status bonus thanks to our blood magic, which is at this point probably going to be always active because we're going to be casting spells all the time. So we are very good at demoralizing enemies and keeping them demoralizing thanks to our champion features. We are reasonably mobile, reasonably survivable for a spellcaster, and our biggest weakness is of course our reflex saving throws. The big thing that's missing from this build, of course, is the defining feature of the sorcerer, and that is the spellcasting. So let's see how good of a spellcaster we are in the spell snapshot section. Alright, we start at level 1, and the first thing we need to worry about are our cantrips. So we would start by selecting an offensive cantrip like Electric Arc, the golden standard of offensive cantrips, and then maybe a second one in case we face electricity resistant enemies. We could go for Ray of Frost because of its high range and because it's a cantrip which uses a spell attack instead of targeting the reflex saving throw. But personally I like Scatter Scree. It is still a reflex saving throw cantrip, but it has the added utility of creating difficult terrain, which might come in handy in certain circumstances, so I will take this. As far as offensive cantrips go, we are pretty good. Our bloodline also gives us Detect Magic, which is pretty nice. And so I will take here some utility, something like Mage Hand, and maybe Shield for a third action which can be used defensively. we could actually carry around a real shield and use that for a higher circumstance bonus to armor class and get another cantrip. Or we could use them both and use this as the sacrificial shield, which doesn't cost us anything, and then resort to the actual shield for further raise the shield actions. This leaves us with our first level spells. Our bloodline gives us Magic Missile, which is a very nice guaranteed damage effect. We can upcast this for extra damage, or just use a cheeky single action to finish off an enemy, although I don't think this is something we might do at level 1 where our spell slots are so limited. We do have 3, which is 1 more than most characters, except for clerics, get at this level. The first spell I'm going to choose is, of course, Magic Weapon. This is the biggest offensive spell we can probably get, although it is strictly speaking a buff, but this makes our martial perform way better, so it's just too good not to take if you've got it available. And then we've got on-demand guaranteed damage. We got a very powerful buff. We are probably going to use most of our spell slots for that. So for the third option, I'm going to take some utility, and I'm going to take a summon spell. You can take either Summon Animal or Animate Dead, depending on what you like the most. In this case, let's take Summon Animal. For those circumstances where you don't know what's down that alley and you think it might be full of traps and you want to send an animal to trigger them, or maybe summoning an extra body on the field to soak some attacks, is probably good enough for a first level spell slot. The Skunk also has a very nice AoE ability, which is a debuff. So this is a very flexible spell that can do a lot of things, and I really like it as my utility spell. So we are pretty on par at level 1 with other spellcasters. The most significant thing here is that extra spell we can use, which is pretty neat. Most of the time we're going to resort to our electric arc, maybe do a shield, maybe move around, of course try to intimidate, and in general stay out of trouble. Let's see what happens if we level up to level 6. This is the next step into our build. Keep in mind that we can exchange a spell every time we level up, just like in 5th edition, and we can also retrain if we want to completely revolutionize our spell list. So we're not stuck with these spells, but we should be mindful of our choices nevertheless. Cantrips are going to remain the same throughout our career. Magic Weapon has probably become useless at this point, so why not to take a neat little fun control spell, which is a staple in the arcane list, and that is Grease. You can make creatures fall prone, waste actions. It looks in general like a lot of fun. I'm also going to take Illusory Object. This is a 20-foot burst illusion, which can be any stationary object. You can use this to create cover and maybe do some light control on the battlefield. It's like a more powerful version of Minor Illusion, which costs a spell slots. Although at this point, I think our first level spells are no longer that valuable. We can afford to use them on spells like Illusory Objects. At level 3, we have unlocked our signature spells. This means that for every spell level, we can select a spell, and we can treat this basically as a 5th edition spell, which means we can upcast this using every single level available to us. If we want to, we can also learn a heightened version of a spell and make it a signature spell, and this will allow us to downcast it instead. So let's see how this works. We can select Summon Animal as a signature spell. I think this makes sense because the combat effectiveness of summons is only relevant if you use them on the highest level spell slot. However, if you want some chaff, you can drop a first level Summon Animal and just have the pig run through the corridor and trigger all the traps. And that's a very efficient use of a first level spell. Every single level we have here the Summon Animal spell. We can cast it as a 2nd level or a 3rd level spell, and we don't need to learn it at these higher levels, which otherwise we would need to do. We have 2nd level spells. We dropped our buff spell, Magic Weapon, so let's get another spell that marshals are probably going to enjoy a lot, and that spell is Enlarge. It lasts 5 minutes, so maybe you can make it last through multiple combats, and what this spell does is it gives a bit of a damage buff, but most importantly, it increases the reach of a martial character. So this can be very convenient, for example, on a fighter, to help them trigger their opportunity attacks. Another very cool 2nd level spell is Illusory Creature. This can create literally anything. I spent a lot of my Bard video saying how much I think this spell is great. So if you want to hear me talk up more about this spell, you can go check that video out. But it's very good, both for damage, if you really want to have the creature attack and deal the 1d4 plus spellcasting modifier damage, but just as a distraction and a control effect, it's limited only by your creativity. And I like it so much that I'm going to make it as a signature spell, not necessarily because I wanted a higher damage, but because this way I can cast it more time using my higher level spell slots as well. And finally, a staple level 2 spell, which I personally always take when it's available, is Invisibility. Great for scouting, great for increasing your survivability, great out of combat utility, amazing spell. Our Bloodline gives us Dispel Magic, which is pretty neat, and we go to the level 3 spells. Now, there is no point in taking a signature spell as a level 3 spell because we have no higher spell slots than level 3. But what we can do is we can learn a heightened spell that does something at level 3 and then make it a signature spell so we can downcast it. So here, what I'm going to do is learn Fear and make it a signature spell. Fear is a first level spell, so now I can cast Fear using a second, which is probably not a very good idea, but also a first level spell, and that's pretty nice, because it's a guaranteed frightened, basically, unless the enemy critically succeeds, and if they fail, they are frightened too. So it's a very neat use of a first level spell. But it also makes sense to learn this as a third level spell, because when it's heightened to third level, it has the additional advantage of targeting up to 5 creatures, so it becomes AoE. You could just learn this at first level and make it a signature spell, and you would accomplish the same effect. However, I think that by doing this, you are being more efficient with your use of signature spells. Speaking of iconic third level spells, we wouldn't be a sorcerer without access to Fireball. AoE damage is kind of like the speciality of spellcasters, and at these levels where Fireball has just become available, it seems a no-brainer to get it. And finally, we can also have control in the form of Slow, a very powerful action economy effect which allows you to siphon off actions from powerful enemy-like bosses. We also have a Bloodline spell, and that's the dual effect of Slow, and that is Haste. I wouldn't cast Haste on ourselves necessarily, but maybe there are some characters in the party, like martial characters, that can use the extra action, the extra strike, and they will be very thankful if we hasten them. While leveling up, we also gained a feature which we should not forget. At level 4, we gained the Arcane Evolution, so we can give ourselves a bonus spell known at any level, or an extra signature spell. I feel that right now we have enough signature spells, so what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to give myself an extra second level spell. And this spell is going to be an offensive spell in the form of Flaming Sphere. This allows me to sustain a spell every turn, gaining a nice use for my third action to deal a little bit extra damage every turn. And with this we conclude our level 6 Snapshot. Let's now move up to level 11. At level 11, I think I'm going to change my signature spell. It's no longer going to be Fear, and it's going to be Slow instead, because it's such a powerful spell that being able to cast it at higher levels makes a lot of sense. For this reason, I'm going to go back and exchange Grease for Fear, which I feel is an effect which might be useful more often than Grease. At level 3, Fireball no longer deals enough damage cast as a third level spell, so I'm going to exchange it for something different, and I'm going to take Time Jump. This is a single action spell, so we can weave in very easily in our standard routine, and this is an action efficiency spell, which gives us 2 actions that we can use to stride away without triggering reactions. So this is a very nice get out of trouble effect. Since we are a build which kind of relies on being in melee, we can also use this offensively, although I would generally keep this for emergencies. I'm still going to keep third level Fear as a known spell because an AoE Fear effect seems pretty useful. We have unlocked 4th level spells, and at 4th level I'm actually going to learn Heightened Invisibility and make it a signature spell. If I cast it as a 4th level spell, then it only lasts 1 minute, but it doesn't disappear when we are using hostile actions. So we can use this to buff our defenses in hard fights. We can use this to protect our allies or to buff our allies. Since this is a signature spell, we have access to regular invisibility on lower spell slots. I see myself spamming in some situation invisibility if we are, for example, in a scouting mission where we need to pop in and out of invisibility often, so I think it's not a bad idea to have it as a signature spell. However, there is no point of having a second level spell known dedicated to it, so I can exchange it for a different option, and I'm going to choose Mirror Image for survivability. I feel like these options are kind of important since we are a bit of a melee spellcaster. At 4th level, there is also a very powerful spell, which Pathfinder 2nd edition is not a 3rd level, but it's 4th, and it makes sense because it's very powerful and it's the Fly spell. So I'm going to learn that. And for my 3rd spell, I'm going to learn an offensive spell, and that spell is going to be Innervation. This is a line which allows a fortitude saving throw, and even if the enemy succeeds, this still deals 2d8 persistent negative damage. And if they fail, it deals more damage and also applies the drain condition. So it's very nice. Although lines are not the easiest areas to aim, this seems a very potent effect. Our Bloodline gives us Dimension Door, another get out of trouble spell. Very nice to have. And then we have level 5. Now, we should keep in mind that since we are level 11, we have passed level 8, so we have access to a spell from outside our school, thanks to Cross-Blooded Evolution. And there are a lot of options for these spells, but I feel that what the arcane list is glaringly missing is a healing spell. So we're going to take the best healing spell in the game, and that is Heal. We are going to learn the heightened version of Heal and set it as a signature spell. I'm using a 5th level spell known for this because I feel there aren't many other 5th level spells that I would want to put as signature spells. So Heal fits very nicely here. We can downcast it, or we can upcast it and heal for a lot. And potentially, we have access to even more heals than clerics, thanks to signature spells. So I think that the best healer in the game might not be the cleric, but a sorcerer maybe who takes the cleric dedication for the feats that buff healing. But this is a ton of healing just by this feat and the signature spell feature. We can then take some actual arcane 5th level spells, such as Wall of Stone for control. Wall spells are very powerful control effects, which do not allow saving throws, so yes. And also a very iconic spell in the forms of Black Tentacles. This is an AoE terrain which deals damage, grapples creatures, makes them lose actions, and maybe we can lock the creatures inside our Black Tentacles and then build a wall all around them on the next turn if they don't escape. Our Bloodline spell is Prying Eye, a very nice scouting spell. We just get it for free, and it feels great. Finally, we also have 6th level spells. I'm going to take an offensive spell here, and I'm going to take Chain Lightning, which is better than Fireball because it deals a bit more damage, and it is more party friendly. It's easier to aim this with your marshals in melee. Also, I think lightning damage is less easily resisted than fire damage. And as always, I'm going to learn a heightened spell here so I can make this my signature spell and have more spells I can cast at lower levels. Roaring Applause heightens at level 6 and becomes an AoE spell. And what this does is it prevents creatures from using reactions, even if they succeed on the saving throw. And if they fail, it applies an array of effects low. So it's a very nice control effect, which we can use as a single target control spell using lower level spell slots. And our Bloodline also gives us Disintegrate, a nice attack action spell. Keep in mind that our spell attack, while it does use our best stat and our best proficiencies, is still not up to standard with what a marshal can have for their attack rolls. Marshals get expert proficiencies and then master proficiency faster than we get our expert spellcasting proficiency. See here, we are level 7, we get the spellcasting proficiency at expert. Marshal usually get it at 5. So while Disintegrate is a very cool effect, be careful about spamming this. Try and get an evaluation of how high the armor class is of the thing you're targeting, because missing with such a high level spell slot feels horrible. Just go Chain Lightning if you want to deal damage, way more reliable. I think I'm going to get a 4th level spell and learn Heightened Enlarge. This allows us to grow a creature to huge and increase the bonus to damage they get as well as their reach. I think there is still a reason to keep enlarge at level 2, because there might not be enough space on the battle for huge creatures. So if there isn't, you can resort back to enlarge to increase still the reach of your marshals. And if there is enough space, then you can go enlarge plus with your 4th level spell slots. So it's a nice little buff. And with this, we have concluded our level 11 spell snapshot. Let's level up again and go to level 16. The first thing to keep in mind is that we gained signature spell expansion, so we can have more signature spells. We can make enlarge a signature spell, since we have an abundance of low-level signature spells, which can be up to 3rd level spells. So we no longer need to use our bonus spell for heightened enlarge, and enlarge heightens at 4th and at 6th. At 6th it becomes area of effect. The spell magic is also a spell which makes sense if you upcast it, because it becomes able to counteract better spells. So let's make that a signature spell as well. As you can see, we have gained greater mental evolution, which gives us even more spells known. For level 1, since we have disintegrate, and as I said, disintegrate has all those problems, let's learn true strike so we can use attack spells more reliably. This gives us advantage on a roll, and I think it's essential to have if we are planning to use disintegrates and other similar effects. For level 2, we can take a nice mobility buff in the form of spider climb for those situations where you might not want to fly. Alternatively, you can take a defensive spell like blur. At level 3, I'm going to take Wall of Wind to protect ourselves against ranged attacks. Our spells work through the Wall of Wind. Ranged attacks don't necessarily do that. So it is certainly a circumstantial spell, but we know so many that we can afford to pick this niche utility spells and not feel bad about it. We already have everything we could possibly want. We have control, we have damage, we have healing. And I feel like at this point we are competing very well with the wizard, because we can learn the spell, but we don't have to put it in a spell slot. We can pull it out when it becomes relevant, and if it never becomes relevant in the day, we can just use these spell slots just to cast a slow and be happy about it. So thanks to the extra spells we get with Mental Evolution, with Bloodline, and with signature spells, I feel like we are really rivaling the wizard as a prepared spellcaster in terms of the versatility and flexibility we have. At level 4, we are going to use our Greater Mental Evolution to gain the spell Veil. This is a party-wide disguise. Again, circumstantial spell, but it can be very useful and it lasts for a long duration. I have a hard trouble thinking about a campaign where this wouldn't come in handy, maybe even multiple times, so very nice to have it available, even on a short notice. Maybe you're exploring a dungeon and you run up on a bunch of cultists. With this spell, you can convince them, if you notice them before they notice you, that maybe you are on their side. And there are a lot of other situations where this can be applied very effectively. At 5th level, since I like Black Tentacles, I think I'm going to make it a signature spell. I'm also going to swap heal for Forceful Hand. This is a spell that at 5th level is not very good, but it's better when it's heightened. And so what I'm going to do is set this as a signature spell as well. And I'm going to do so with my Arcane Evolution. So I'm going to renounce the bonus spell I get at level 4 to get an extra signature spell. And I'm going to use that extra signature spell to make Forceful Hand a signature spell. So I can upcast it and gain the effects, giving it the ability to swat as well, the ability to grasp, which is very, very powerful, and the ability to punch and crush eventually. For our Greater Mental Evolutions, a very powerful effect is the Tongues spell. This makes it so we can understand every creature and speak the language of every creature. Again, utility spell, but we have our 5th level spells sorted, so we can take that as well. Level 6, we gain an extra level 6 spell. We can take Wall of Force. We could have taken it a while ago. I felt like Wall of Stone was doing its job pretty well, so I didn't feel like taking it immediately. We didn't have many damage spells, so I prioritized Chain Lightning over Wall of Force, but you can do it the other way around if you like Control more than you like Chain Lightning. This is not as broken as it is in 5th edition, so it's not an auto pick immediately as soon as you get it, but it is very powerful still. We also get an extra spell for Greater Mental Evolution, and here I took Stone Skin. For the resistance to physical damage, we can buff our survivability, we can buff the survivability of our marshals with it. We get 7th level spells. We're going to learn some heightened spells which are so powerful, which I think justifies learning multiple times. Haste as a 7th level spell targets up to 6 creatures, so realistically the entirety of the party. You can make this a signature spell, but it does nothing up to level 7. It's just the same spell. And I don't know if I would use a 8th or 9th level or even 10th level for this effect. So I think that just learning it for level 7 and level 3 is good enough. Also, we get it for free at level 3, so I think it's fine. A powerful 7th level spell is True Target. This is True Strike, again, on the entirety of the party, and it costs just 1 action. So if you have many martial in your party, this is insane value. And finally, I'm going to learn another heightened spell, and that spell is Flight. If we cast it as a 7th level spell, it lasts for an hour. We can make it a signature spell, so we can enable the entirety of the party basically to fly on demand. We are going to unlock next level a class feature which enables us to fly, but until then, this is certainly very useful. This means we do not need to fly anymore, and so we can learn instead Suggestion. Now, this was buffed up 2 levels when compared to 5th edition, and it has the incapacitation trait. So it's not a spell you can use on enemies. We could try an upcasting this, but I think the most reliable way to use this is just don't use it against high-level enemies. Use it against mooks. Use it out of combat to make people do what you want. So it's more of a utility spell than it is a control spell, I feel, in Pathfinder 2nd edition, but it's still pretty good. Our 7th level Bloodline spell is Prismatic Spray. Not the best 7th level spell, not the worst. And there is a 7th level spell which is missing from the ones that I took here, but we can take it with greater mental evolution, and that spell is Contingency. If you play D&D, you know how good Contingency is. We can use it to cast multiple spells in a single round if we set up our Contingency properly. So very, very good. And finally, at level 16, we also have level 8 spells. I'm going to prepare Mind Blank, which is useful to protect ourselves also from creatures who see through invisibility and stuff like that. So it's very useful. I will also take Disappearance to make us harder to spot. And I'm going to prepare our heightened Chain Lightning and make it a signature spell, so we can downcast it if we feel like it. We no longer need to have it at level 6, and so we can prepare here our heal spell. To do that, Roaring Applause no longer needs to be a signature spell. Our 8th level Bloodline spell is Maze, which is incredible. It's a very powerful control effect which takes away the actions of the enemy even when they succeed on their saving throws. And for our greater mental evolution, I will take Power Word Stun. This is effective against low-level enemies. It can stun them for multiple rounds, and it's appealing because it's a single action, so it's very easy to weave in. If you want to do some powerful burst turns, you can drop this together with another leveled spell in the same turn. And this is all for level 16. Let's go up to level 20. And we get to level 20. Now at level 18, we unlock the Greater Cross-Blooded Evolution. This means that we can have up to 3 spells which are not of our spell list. So the first one is going to be a 4th level spell which we take instead of Suggestion, and it's going to be the Primal Airwalk spell. This is a better fly spell because it does not require an action to remain in flight. Since this is a competitor to flight, I don't think it's necessary to know this as a 7th level spell anymore, so I'm going to exchange it for another summon spell. And this spell is Duplicate Foe. This is a summon which duplicates, as the name implies, an enemy. The enemy gets to save to make the copy less effective in combat and give it less HP and make it last less. But this is a very nice conjuration, and you can target it on enemies of level 15 or lower, so you can summon pretty powerful creatures with this effect. Since it heightens well, we might as well make it a signature spell. We will keep 8th level spells as they are, and at 9th level spells, we will get another spell which is very powerful and does not belong to the arcane list. This is the occult spell Synesthesia. which can take away actions from enemies, make them fail spell concentration checks, and gives it a huge penalty to the armor class. Since there aren't many level 9 spells that it makes sense to make signature spells because you would heighten them only at level 10, I prepared this heightened so that then I can use every single spell slot below 9th level to cast this amazing spell, which is a very powerful single target control effect. 9th level also has very powerful buffs, such as Foresight, which lasts for an hour and gives bonuses to initiative rolls, and a very powerful reaction, which you can use to give advantage to the target in certain circumstances. And you can also have an AoE damage effect, which targets will saving throws in the form of Weird. And if any creature critically fails, they have a chance of actually dying. Although it's unlikely. Our Bloodline gives us Prismatic Sphere. I think our other option for 9th level are better than this, so we're probably not going to cast it much. And for our Greater Mental Evolution, let's get more damage dealing. We wouldn't be a sorcerer without Meteor Swarm. And finally, we get to level 10. We can get Time Stop for amazing buffing capability. We can get Wish, because why not? And we can get any other 10th level spell. Cataclysm for damage. We can take any of these spells, because I think the other two are probably going to be cast more often. You can even take Wish as your Greater Mental Evolution and learn here any other spell from any other level, heightened, and then make it a signature spell. So for example, if you want Blur, you can learn Blur heightened and then cast it as a lower level spell. Just use this not as a spell slot you're going to cast, but as an additional spell known slot. And this wraps up the spell list for the sorcerer at level 20. Now if we take a look at it by scrolling down, we see that for every level of spells, thanks to signature spells, we have got a lot of options, and these options really cover every single thing a spellcaster might want to do with their spells. So let us take a moment, reflect on that, and move to the final thoughts of the build. Our decision to go and lean heavily into the intimidation, take hobgoblin feats, take champion archetype feats to be able to be in melee and demoralize enemies was something that added a lot of flavor to our character and made unique. But after the spell selection, I think it's pretty obvious that the true power of the sorcerer comes from their core class and their ability to just be very thorough and comprehensive in whatever spell list they choose to cover. If I look at my spell list at any level, I feel, to explain this in 5th edition terms, as if I am looking at a Clockwork Soul sorcerer, which is a sorcerer that is famous for having access to many wizard spells and knowing more spells, thus being better sorcerer than the average. So it's like a clockwork list that has access to any wizard spells, not just some schools, and can learn more than a clockwork would, and also has access to magical secrets from the bard, so they can pilfer anything they want from any kind of spellcaster, and also they have extra spell slots. So there is no way in hell that the wizard can rival with this. It's absolutely impossible in my mind. It's incomprehensible to me how a spellcaster could be better than this. I know I said something similar for the bard, but the bard does not have this versatility, this flexibility, and these many spells. The feats that support the arcane bloodline together with the cross-blooded evolution make it so you can really spread out the amounts of spell known, and the fact that you are a spontaneous spellcaster means that you can have some circumstantial niche effect memorized, because your memorized slots are not that valuable. You've got very many of them, and you can always whip out the perfect solution for a lot of problems. The wizard will have to prepare. You are kind of always prepared. Yes, there are some pretty niche circumstances where I expect the wizards to be able to customize the list perfectly, but in your average playthrough, for your average player, this is just overwhelmingly more powerful than I think any prepared spellcaster that I saw thus far. So after seeing what the sorcerer can do and what the sorcerer can be, and after appreciating how versatile they can be, because if I had decided to make an occult sorcerer or a divine sorcerer, this spell list would have been completely different and the character would have been completely different. So we've got fighter's level of versatility of the character here. I think this is an amazing spellcaster class, and I am very tempted to give him the crown of the best arcane spellcaster in Pathfinder 2nd edition, at least as far as the core rulebook classes are concerned. But before we do that, before we get ahead of ourselves with our enthusiasm, let us suspend our judgment for now and wait for next week, when we will try and learn the wizard class as well, and see if they can compete with these absolutely ludicrous levels of nonsense. Until then, I thank you all very much for listening, and I'll see you all in the next one.